can never tell. Um, Rev Derek here. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at Rev Derek Terry. And patreon.com/race, rage, and fear is responsible for the series that I'm doing of The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois, William Edward Burghardt, The Boys. We're on chapter 6 of The Training of Black Men. Yes, it's misogynistic. I hope if you're not reading, it's dope that you're at least listening to me talk about it. I'm going to try to make this video as brief as possible, but it covered a lot. And it's not even, the essay is slightly longer than what we've been reading, but this feels like there's a lot more information in there. And it is a little longer than some of the last ones. Most of Du Bois's books essays are written, most of us studied them in college in these anthologies. So they pick most popular ones, like the first 2 or 3, definitely the first 2. The Coming of John, the Sorrow Songs, those are ones that you'll read a lot. So some people, this is their first time reading some of these deeper essays. And I've read this book so many times. Can you see the markage that is there? But anyway, so today we're talking about the training of Black men. This is really a continuation of a couple. Did you see the theme of education? So, of course, chapter 3 of Booker T. Washington and others, and of course, of the meaning of progress, and on the wings of Atalanta. Lots of education. This is pounding home, and many of the things that Du Bois has already mentioned up until this point. So I want to offer some context that is not in the book that I think will be helpful for the work or helpful with the reading. And the context that I want to offer is just a really brief overview, got my notes, of Du Bois's own education. So we don't know a lot about his grammar school education. We don't. We know that he was pretty smart. And by the time he went to high school in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where he's from, again, he was born 3 years after the end of the Civil War. He is pretty knowledgeable of of French, of German. He, of course, is pretty brilliant in English, and he's a beautiful writer. He has to study Greek and Latin, doesn't always have the money to do that. And there were benevolent factors and friends and white people in his hometown and the church that helped. There was a woman he talked about in his autobiography, I can't remember her name now, who actually bought his books. Before he goes to college at Fisk, I feel super bad because I don't remember if his mother died before Fisk or before he went to Germany. So my bad. I apologize. I'll get that information to you. So what happens, graduates high school, and like most Black people at the time, he has this gap period where he works, saves money. He goes south to Fisk. Fisk at this particular time is the Harvard of Black people. And he talks about, in his autobiography, how Fisk was full of mulattoes. When he was there, there are still people that were slaves that are alive and well and walking around, right? This book is published. It's 40 years, 4 decades out of slavery. And he talked about the privilege of being at the school and seeing the mulatto being mixed, black, white. So the mixed children of their white former masters, the mixed children of politicians, white politicians, wealthy politicians who made babies with black women and sent their kids to Fisk. And Fisk was interesting because that was the first time he traveled. He ventured south. And again, he's from the north. And him often being the only black person in his school, being the only black person, one of the only that he knew that would speak these languages. It was brilliant at this point. He's at a university, well, I guess a college at that time, with black people who are just as well read, who have traveled, who have means, who know what fork to use, know how to dress. And that's really, it gives him a sense of pride in himself. Graduates from Fisk. He's pretty young when he does that, 15 to 16 from high school. Then he goes to Fisk. And I think that's when his mom dies. And in the next video, I'll let you know. So it's really sad part in his life. But something happens where he says, I want to go to Harvard. His high school teacher had told him, as brilliant as you are, I think you can go to Harvard. And that's in high school. But, it goes to Fisk first. Harvard, didn't matter where you went to school, how smart you were. And Fisk would have had professors from some of the top schools, white, black, white definitely at that time. But if you were black, you had to take 2 years of basically college preparedness, so remedial courses in writing and thinking, critical thinking, and that kind of thing, in order to matriculate to get a bachelor's. So he was pissed. He talked about this. The Lewis book talks about it. He was not happy, but he did what he had to do. He took a writing course. But the course that really made a huge impact on him was an analytical course from a young philosophy professor by the name of William James, who would become pretty famous in this country if you're a student of philosophy. And William James really makes a huge impact on Du Bois in his process and his thinking. William James is a huge mentor and help. He gives Du Bois his first suit, like this 3-piece suit. It's silk lined and makes a huge impact on his dignity and, this sense of somebodyness. And after finishing that at Harvard, he realizes that what he wants to do academically, professionally, does not exist in our country. He wants to take a class, was to study political economics. So the economics of politics. And that would send him to Germany. And I think that's when his mom died. So just before that, this sadness. I'll find out. I really apologize. But anyway, I don't want to get hung up on that, take up too much time. So he goes to Germany. His grades are outstanding. He really wants his German degree. He has fun in Germany. And he talks about that in his autobiography. Still veiled with some of the racism, but not as it is here. It's different then. And this is Germany in the, late 18th century. So Hitler and all that hasn't happened yet. And he loves Germany. and the women love him. And he's there for 3 semesters. And he really wants this PhD. And his grades are the highest they can be. His writing is the highest it can be. But they refuse to give him a PhD just after 3 semesters. And he's really kind of sad about that. So he makes a deal with Harvard, come back, do some coursework, and he finished his doctorate at Harvard at the age of 28. I forgot what it was in, but it doesn't matter. But he finishes his doctorate. He becomes a professor at Wilberforce in the classics. So, we think of all of the classics, those European art and culture and all of that. So this is important when we talk about the training of Black men, because it's important to think about what Du Bois valued and why he valued it. So the classic liberal arts training and education that he received is what he believes is the foundation for the Black man that he is, the well-rounded Black man. He makes, he talks about the art for art's sake, and the art in the galleries of Europe, and how these things shaped him and his thinking. And that a Black man, and I hate to keep using the word man, but he's a person of his time. So what he's saying is Black people, but using that time, man meant humans. Black people needed the beauty of art and contemplation and peace and harmony, and all these things prepared a person for work, not just the skill of hand. Like you need art and music, and we talked about this before, in order to think and to do these things. And so that's laying the foundation. He sees this Black, I wouldn't say poor, but didn't have huge means, male from rural New England, has had an entire world open up to him through an education that wasn't based on trade. It was thinking and thought. And it shaped him. It really shaped who he would become. So we must understand, as we talk about this being a continuation from the Booker T. Washington chapter 3. Booker T. Washington means really well. And Booker T. Washington is completely different from Du Bois. Du Bois is slightly younger, but he was also born 3 years after slavery. Booker T. Washington is slightly older and was born a slave. I mean, literally. His autobiography is up from slavery. God, that's just what I do. Because I need to, I mark up the text. So Booker T. Washington is also from the South. Du Bois is from the Northeast. Completely different world. So Booker T is saying that this is the best, most prudent course for the teaching and education of former slaves. So, and former slaves told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. We're used to working 6 days a week, off on Sundays. I had a very regimented And they had skills and they had certain things that they did. So he thought this was the best way to trade. And remember, his education was at Hampton, which was a trade school. And he himself went from slavery to being the president of this college through this course. So the courses that we take, what we fall in love with, it's easy to see why that would be what Black people would think. So again, it's this whole debate between Booker T and Du Bois. And at that time, this was a major thought because Booker T. Washington was the most famous Negro in the world. He's getting all this money to build Tuskegee, which is in Alabama, still a university, taking away resources from other places, liberal arts places. And white people are looking to Booker T, say, what do you think? And white people pick Booker T to be the spokesperson. All that because Du Bois addresses that in this chapter. Three things Du Bois, three thoughts on race. One thought of race at that time is that there should be unity and cooperation with the races, right? Can't we all just get along? And some people thought that that's what's happening. That's what they see. Same way in our world today. There are white people and Black people who look and say, well, it's not that bad, right? There's unity and cooperation. I've dated Black guys. I've dated white women. Blah, 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 blah. That is a thought. Second thought, Du Bois calls the old Southern way. The old Southern way gave permission and justified and argued and fought to keep slavery. Blacks in the old Southern way of thought were not 100% human. I mean, remember in the Constitution at one point we were 3/5 human, right? So there was some type of third category, not as human or as smart as white people, but not animals either. Lovable within their limitations, Du Bois quoted someone as saying, but uniquely suited for work in this way. Coming from Africa, from that type of climate, with the noses that we have, the ability to stand the sun, so they're uniquely equipped to do this. White people can't do that. Du Bois pushes back against the old Southern way of thinking because that's what led to slavery and the Civil War. Why in the hell would we want to hang on to that? The third thought of race was the Black people thinking that Black people deserve dignity and striving and all the equality and all the things that freedom should give them. But 1/3 of the country is thinking, oh, everything is well, all is good. 1/3 of the country wanting to keep Black people the way they are, 1/3. And again, it's not necessarily 1/3, but this is just 3 points of thought. So those are the thoughts on race. Booker T. Washington says the normal and industrial schools, well, actually not even normal schools being like teacher training, the industrial schools should be enough. That Black people should find a way to make themselves successful by doing this work that white people don't want to do or can't do. And if we fill these needs, one, will create wealth for ourselves, but two, this compromise will be safer for us. It's really hard. It's really easy to push back against Booker T, but we also have to remember he saw the plantation. We also have to remember this is the lynching era. People are getting lynched and nothing is happening to them, North and South. So I give him a pass think he was wrong-ish. I do think industrial schools are needed, and I think they're important now, and trade is important now. But I don't think that was all that was necessary. But I also see him saying, what if we practice this respectability? Perhaps we won't be lynched. Unfortunately, that's not the case because Black success, I mean, there were successful Black towns that were burned down and shot, and not just Tulsa. So he was just wrong. So Du Bois pushes back on that, saying industrial schools aren't enough. And he talks about the 30,000 teachers that almost eradicated illiteracy among Black people. So the Freedmen's Bureau, most slaves couldn't read. Freedmen's Bureau starts, he says 30,000 teachers go throughout the country to teach Black people to read, and the literacy rates were through the roof. That debunkified the myth that Black people couldn't handle intellect. And Du Bois says, without those educated people, those 30,000 teachers who educated these Black people, there wouldn't even be a Tuskegee, because the people that were educated in those normal schools, those teaching schools, are the very teachers that are teaching at Tuskegee right now. So Booker T, you can't just say this is the only thing when your school has benefited from these other types of education. And not just to educate, to learn, but to give Black people a hope, a desire, a feeling of humanity, of dignity, of culture. Du Bois was huge on that. It wasn't just about money. It was about human dignity, culture. He also introduced a concept that we're going to delve into, and we have to critique, even though it's 118 years ago, we still have to critique this idea of the talented 10th. Du Bois was conservative. Du Bois was, what's the word? Goodness. Respectable. That's what I was looking for. Respectability politics. Du Bois was also an elitist. Now, this whole idea of the talented 10th, if you have 10 Negroes or 100% of the Negroes, 1/10 of them are the privileged, the educationally privileged, the Du Boisians. So literally 10%, 1/10. And I don't know how he came up with that number. Maybe I've read it before, but I don't remember. It also, so that's the way I grew up. And I used to call myself, I'm part of the talented 10th because I'm extremely educated and I'm working to be educated. But then as I got older, I learned, and when I say younger, I mean like 14, 15, 16. That was like a push for me and my friends. Like, yep, we're not going to be the statistics. We're not going to be the stereotype. We're going to, do this. As I got older, I started to realize the elitism that was there. But there was a phrase going around at that time, and even the late 19th century, of the new Negro. And these were privileged. There's just no other way of saying it. Some type of privilege. It could have been of their proximity to whiteness, meaning their complexion, they were the progeny, perhaps, of interracial love or relationships, maybe not even love. The connections that they had. Du Bois benefited from being connected to white people who invested in his education. At every point, that was a privilege. It could be literacy or their educational achievements. But new Negroes were not the old Negroes. They were not the dumb, passive. They may have been poor, but they had seen or experienced something that pulled them forward, gave them a striving. Um, and those were the new Negroes, those who were the talented 10th. And so what Du Bois is saying is this talented 10th must be able to take this privilege and through their education and life and culture and all these things, be able to move that into a larger culture and literacy and improvement in the community. So I've heard people say, and I'll push back on it actually. I've heard people say that, education, and Du Bois would say that education was a response to racism or a way to, I don't know if it's to debunk or to degrade or dismiss racism, but in my notes, I honestly think that Du Bois saw education as a way to self-advocate, to be able to take care of yourself, or self-care, not just take care of yourself, but to understand the need of self-care. Like, okay, racism exists, but I can advocate for myself within this system. I need to take care of myself because I realize that I'm outnumbered, I'm outgunned. So there are times when I need to step back. Self-knowledge, dignity, to withstand racism. Because racism was, and Du Bois does not speak about it in a way of, oh, well, eventually it's going to go away. I think he hopes and thinks that one day it will not be what it is, but he realizes it is what it is, and we have to be able to withstand that. And I do think that the education piece, and that's where this whole elitist thing comes from, gives you a sense of somebodyness, even in the midst of hell and torture and torment. I also think Du Bois wants us to take away from this, when we talk about educating Black men or Black people, that the idea that Black people know what's best for Black people, and that white people may have the best of intentions, but Black people know what's best for us and our community. And I think that's a little dig. I don't know if we meant it to be, but historically, as I told you, white people picked Booker T. Washington. He was safe. He was a pacifist. He said what he wanted them to, that they wanted him to say. Those old Southern way people could go along with that because it still kept Black people in a subservient position. But Du Bois is saying that's one way, but you still have to listen to other Black people about what we think is best for us. And I also think that Du Bois always says Washington did a really great thing. Look what he was able to do, and look what he was able to build to literally go from slavery to be this prestigious president of this prestigious school. But it's more than just to make a living. All is important. Money is important, but also the vote is important. Political power is important in politics and education. And in our current age, policing, prisons, capitalism, we can't just have success in one area or reform in one area. Like we have, it has to be the collective. And that the more we educate ourselves, the more we learn to think, the more we learn about the past, the more we we study and have this really well-rounded way. That's why I think that analytical course has such a profound impact on him, because it taught him how to think in a way, to use the master's tools, as it were. Yeah. So 30 minutes. This is a long one. I just have a couple quotes that I want to share. But yeah, let me know what you think. Please, please, please. I want to know what people think. A couple of quotes that really stood out for me. Is not life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? And men ask this today all the more eagerly because of sinister signs and recent educational movements. The tendency is here, born of slavery and quickened to renewed life by the crazy imperialism of the day, to regard human beings as among the material resource of the land, to be trained with a single eye to future dividends. Race prejudices which keep brown and black men in their places, where we are coming to regard as useful allies with such a theory, no matter how much they may dull the ambition of this and sicken the hearts of struggling human beings. Above all, we daily hear that an education that encourages aspiration, that sets the loftiest ideals and seeks as an end culture and character rather than breadwinning, is the privilege of white men and the danger and delusion of black. Is not life more than meat? So why is it that the only people that can think critically, that can have culture, should be white men? And if a black man does that, then that's dangerous or delusional. And I love that he pushes back there. Well, this is good. I don't want to elaborate on it. They must first, he says it's important to have colleges, but we also must have common schools, like elementary, middle, They must first have common school to teach them to read and write and cipher. They must have high schools to teach teachers for the common schools. And the white teachers who flocked south went to establish such a common school system. Few held the idea of founding colleges. Most of them at first would have laughed at the idea, but they faced, as all men face, the central paradox of the South, the social separation of the races. In other words, they did this before. It worked. It did a beautiful thing. It educated all these people. We need to expand that, not shrink it. So last two quotes. He's talking about white people post-slavery, this is post-slavery, who are upset what's going on with the Negro in the South, right? When they were slaves, it was all fine and dandy, right? But now you have all these people, and some of them were pushing back on what should happen to them now. And again, that's a common theme. What do we do with the Negro? James Baldwin asked the question, what do we do with the Negro? You needed us to pick the cotton, but now you don't need us anymore. So is it genocide? People always ask how many slaves were lynched. Very few. Because at the time of the Civil War, the collective value of slaves was more than the railroads, more than anything else in our country. Was $4 billion. And the number one expert of our country was cotton. Who picked the cotton? So when they needed that, you wouldn't dare kill a slave. I mean, you make them, knock out an eye or cut off a foot so they couldn't run away. You would never kill them. But then, when slavery is over, the lynching era starts. So the boys asked the question, old Southern gentlemen, if you deploy their presence, talking about black people here, they ask, who brought us? When you cry, deliver us from the vision of intermarriage, they answer that legal marriage is infinitely better than systematic concubinage and prostitution. And if in just fury you accuse their vagabonds of violating women, they also in fury, quite as just, may reply, the wrong which your gentlemen have done against helpless black women in defiance of your own laws is written on the foreheads of 2 millions of mulattoes and written in the ineffable blood. And finally, when you fasten crime upon this race as its particular trait, they answer that slavery was the art crime and the lawlessness its twin abortion. The color and race are not crimes, and yet they it is which in this land receives most unceasing condemnation, north, east, south, and west. So what he's doing here, he's pushing back to this whole idea of, well, all these black people and they not doing anything, and what if they intermarry, and what if this and what if that? And he's reminding them, if they're a problem, you created this problem, you brought them here, you bred them like cattle, right? And you don't like intermarriage, but you had no problem raping or being in loving extramarital relationships with black women. And there's proof because there are millions of mulattoes, aka mixed race children, walking around right now. You see it on their face, and it is in their blood. And you talk about the crime, and this is very important. You talk about the crime. The crime is a response to the messed up part of slavery. And what do I mean by that? So slavery is the ultimate crime, lynching, the ultimate crime. But when you have years, 250 years of slaves, we must never forget that black people were slaves in this country longer than we've been free. Never forget that. You had 250 years of slavery. And then once free, the Freedmen's Bureau had 12 years. It failed. And there was no restitution, no reparation. And so how must they live? How must they feed their children? They don't have any privilege, any opportunities. You literally use them for generations. And then you say, well, they're breaking the law. Who have they sinned, or where they sinned against? It is a shame that poverty, even now in our country, is criminalized. That's a whole other thing. And lastly, this is a real quick one, where he talks about what should the Negro College do, right? And he says the function of the Negro College is then clear. It must, one, maintain the standards of proper education, because he's basically saying there's a whole lot of terrible colleges out here and they need help. 2, it must seek the social regeneration of the Negro. So not just the educational, not just the financial, but he's talking about this whole well-roundedness. We need to be cultured. That is a little elitist. But remember, this is what made him who he was. And he wants other people to get that. And 3, it must help in the solution of the problems of the race, contact, and cooperation. And finally, 4, beyond all this, it must develop men. Must persist and involve that higher individualism which the centers of culture protect, loftier respect for the sovereign human soul that seeks to know itself and the world about it, that seeks a freedom for expansion and self-development, and that will love and hate and labor in its own way. Such souls aforetime have inspired and guided worlds. And if we be not wholly bewitched by our Rhine-Gold, they shall again. Black men must have respect. The rich and bitter depth of their existence, the unknown treasures of their inner life, the strange renderings of nature they have seen may give the world new viewpoints to view and make their loving, living, and doing precious to all human hearts. He right. In other words, there needs to be a whole self allowed to be human and allowed to experience beauty. We were workhorses for years, not allowed to really think. And when we were smart, we had to hide it, to sneak to read. Knowledge was kept from us. So Du Bois is saying part of the education must be to regenerate all that was stolen, all that was discouraged, all that was taken to and it takes also a level of comfort to do that, right? I mean, it's a privilege. Think about those of us who were able to quarantine at home in comfortable spaces. Again, it's always the have and have nots in our country. And how poor people suffered in smaller spaces in or dangerous neighborhoods. I mean, there were lots of people whose privilege afforded them the opportunity to buy larger spaces or to expand their homes. Just think about that. He's saying Black people deserve the ease of life and culture and class and dignity that our white counterparts have. And in 2021, I don't think it's just a race thing. I think it's also a class thing. I'm going to stop there because I went a lot longer than I normally do in these. But there's just so much that I wanted to get out. The next is Of the Black Belt. It's a little long, but you know, we're doing it and doing it and doing it well. That's that's a song you may not be familiar with. Anyway, it's late. It's 1 a.m. When I'm recording this. So thank you so much, patrons. Please encourage people to join the community. I've posted the Facebook group on the page, and that's a really cool way for us to interact. So please join that. I'm not Facebook friends with most of you, so I can't invite you, but I will. I guess I can send the link in a message. That'll help. Take care. Thank you again, RevDerek.com, DerekTerry.com, Patreon.com/Race Rage Fear. Yeah, toodles. Hope you're reading the book. The next one will be halfway through. Yeah, we're knocking them down. I'm going to miss doing this because this is kind of fun. Take care. God bless. Peace.